Tell me a little bit about your background in terms of where you were born, where you grew up, and a little bit about your family.
All right. I was born in the foothills of the Ozarks in Missouri, in a small town of about 1,000 people. And my father, my adopted father, was a carpenter. He worked during the good times of the year, and in the winter months it was much harder for us. We lived in rural areas, and so it was a struggle. We would be carried at the little store in town and have, the coffee and sugar and flour and things like that. But we would live off the land, the rabbits and squirrels and, the grains that were available from the pasture, and those kinds of things helped to supplement for us. I went to rural schools, walked gravel roads, lived without electricity or running water growing up. So had that experience of neighbors helping neighbors always to get through, and what that meant in terms of community, family around. My grandparents were nearby, so I grew up knowing my grandparents and aunts and uncles, and when it was holiday time, everyone would gather together to celebrate. So experienced family in that way.
And what was the name of the town where you grew up?
Cole Camp, Missouri. I grew up in Cole Camp, Missouri.
And what was the racial makeup? And at that time when you were growing up, did you have exposure to African Americans or other people of other races?
Actually, Cole Camp was a sundown town. I did not know that at the time, and no, I did not have any exposure to people other than probably mostly German settlement and that culture that was there.
Were you aware of that growing up as a child, or were you aware of tensions? What were you aware of?
No, I really had no concept of what a sundown town would have been, and there was not real discussion about race. So I grew up in a rather sheltered environment in terms of having any exposure to people actually from any other culture.
Tell me a little bit more. Did you go to high school there, and when did you have an encounter with an African? When did you do you have a memory of meeting an African American?
During the Second World War, we moved to Kansas City, and my father worked in a war plant. He helped to build bombers, actually. It's an interesting experience for me as a child. Again, rather limited income, and my father, being a carpenter, would bring home the scrap wood from the plant and made bricks, building blocks. So as a child, I played with bomber parts and didn't know it, and as an adult becoming a peace activist and discovering that was just one of the ironies that happens sometimes. Going to school in Kansas City, my first real exposure to African American friends was at the high school level. It was a racially integrated high school, kind of a Milltown neighborhood, and I brought friends home and enjoyed. My parents were very open to my friends, and the neighborhood that they lived in was starting to change racially as well, so that there was that element of neighbors that were people of color.
So you, even before you met your husband, you became active in social causes and social work. Can you talk to me a little bit about your career path and why you chose that?
Mm-hmm. I had a scholarship to go to a junior college in Kansas City, and then the opportunity to go to a Lutheran college in Winfield, Kansas, St. John's College, preparing to be a parish worker in the church. that was kind of a glorified secretary. You were the secretary to the pastor. You took care of the needs of the church council. And then I was placed on the near west side in Chicago in a predominantly poor black neighborhood. And so I had the opportunity to experience public housing projects and working with families that lived there and visiting them there, and working with the Christian education for their children. So that was an experience that helped. I was placed. I don't know what they saw in me in terms of why they thought that would be a good placement, but it was, and it really enriched and deepened my own understandings then of the struggles and the realities for people of color in Chicago.
How did you meet your husband?
It was while I was in Chicago, and actually our pastor came down to Birmingham and had visited Joe, and when he came back he said, "There's this pastor down in Birmingham, you just have to meet him." So he came to Chicago for a national meeting of the Lutheran Human Relations Association, and so I invited him to my apartment, and I made pizza for him, actually. And he went back to Birmingham. We began to write letters, and we would see each other at a church convention once a year or something like that. Became close. But then I was a former colleague of mine, became a Lutheran pastor and he was in the LA area near Watts, and had a school. By that time I had gotten my bachelor's degree in education, having worked with children and felt the need to really grow in that area of knowing how to better educate children. So I had to decide whether I was going to Los Angeles. So I wrote to Joe and said, I will probably be leaving behind some of the friendships and some of the, the relationships I've had. If I go, I'll be striking out on the West Coast and making a whole new start. What do you think I should do? And Joe Ellwanger wrote back and said, "Let the Spirit guide you." I said, "All right, that's it. This relationship is probably not going to, go anywhere." And I went to Los Angeles. But he flew out the next spring and proposed. I only spent 1 year in that school. And then in 1964, in September, we were married, and I moved to Birmingham. He had been the pastor for some years at St. Paul, at Lutheran Church at that time. So I became the pastor's wife.
And being the pastor's wife, talk to me about what that was like coming into that role in an all-black church. Did that surprise you? Were you what were your thoughts when he told you this is an all-black church?
Sure. I had visited in Birmingham in Joe's congregation at St. Paul's Lutheran Church on 6th Avenue South in Titusville. So I had that experience of being welcomed already. And when I came as the pastor's wife, people just embraced me as they loved their pastor. They shared that love with me, and so I felt fully accepted and welcomed and supported.
A favorite memory from your time as the First Lady over this congregation, what would you sort of go through that story?
Oh my, just very rich memories of, my richest memory of the congregation was after we had left Birmingham, when we came back and had the experience of having the first black mayor of Birmingham be part of the service to welcome us, and seeing the changes that had come about. Joe received the key to the city from the black mayor of Birmingham, and there was a black chief of police, and just the changes from the Bull Connor area that we had experienced to have known the power of the Civil Rights Movement and of the Voting Rights Act and the kinds of changes that were coming and the power of the vote to really begin to have representative government in Birmingham.
As First Lady, did you, in that church, did you put together like a women's group or anything like that? And I'm curious as to, in that role, I'm curious as to what you were hearing from parishioners in terms of their treatment. We all know there were separate water fountains and that sort of thing, but what were some of the indignities that you were hearing from people?
Something that comes to mind in terms of just the kinds of social mores were the expectations of people. We had a neighbor across the street on 6th Avenue South. We lived in a parsonage right next to the church. And we, of course, our front door was very accessible. In the back, there were a whole series of steps up to a screened porch. And our neighbor, whenever he would come to the back door, walk up all those steps. And I would say to him, you know, you're so welcome. Please just come in the front door. That's where I'd like to welcome you. And he said, you know, I just can't feel comfortable. I've never been allowed, and I've never felt that I could, come to the front door of a white person. And I said, but I said, that I said I would feel much better if you would, know the welcome at the front door. But it was so ingrained. It's like the kind of thing where you step off the sidewalk and let someone pass, or other things that just weren't so easily overcome for people who had grown up with those kinds of expectations and those kinds of divisions between the races. And the congregation, many of those kinds of issues, the kinds of indignities that happened to people, were just deeply felt, and but within a congregational setting where people could come together and just worship and love each other, love on each other, and be family, and all of those overcome all of those kinds of things that society outside were trying to impose and trying to create. I think that was the beauty of being there and of being able to share. Walking in the street, I can remember just going down the street to the grocery store, and the police car would pull up and say, "Lady, are you lost? Do you need a ride somewhere?" I said, "No, I live right up the street. I'm just going to the grocery store." But seeing a white woman just walking in the neighborhood, suddenly they felt, "You're out of place. You don't belong here. Why are you here? Is there something wrong?" Joe was the only white minister in Birmingham to participate with the local, as he probably shared earlier, with the local civil rights activities and with the movement and with Dr. King and those local pastors. We were just, I think, in the right place at the right time to feel that this was the witness that we could bring, and there were many. Began to be there was at least one integrated, community group that was trying to raise some of the issues and be relevant. Joe was part of that. We were part of that, and then of course, forming the Concerned White Citizens of Alabama to make the march before Bloody Sunday. There were call went out all over the state, and to find the number of people who would come, less than 100, but still quite an amazing group of people to come together and to feel that this is a witness that we could make as white people toward the importance of the Voting Rights Act and seeing it passed. Joe and I had married in September of 1964, and we're delighted to know that we were going to be expecting soon after. So as we approached the springtime, and we're planning for the march, I was aware that I was pregnant. I was almost 5 months pregnant at the time that we went to Selma for the march. Joe was not too excited about the fact that I wanted to go, but I've really felt that I was in the right place at the right time to bring that kind of witness. And if I didn't do it, how could I expect anyone else to be willing to do that? I also, being deeply committed to nonviolence, felt that nonviolent acts help people to overcome some of their own feelings of hatred and of more dramatic feelings of acting on some of that, to bring that kind of witness, and to bring the witness as a person of faith that this is really a spiritual journey. This is a moral right, and that we need to be part of bringing that witness to the broader community. So we stayed awake most of the night before, just talking and being prepared, in the company of 72 other people that we went. One of the tenets of course, nonviolent resistance is that you train and you prepare yourself to accept what might come in the way of the violence that might come toward you. And we had all of that preparation the morning before, as we were in the Selma community, and then walking 2 by 2. It's always interesting to remember, because in these days, today people usually will put on their walking shoes, their tennies, and comfortable jeans and comfortable wear. But we dressed up. We put on our Sunday clothes to go to be part of this witness, and that was earlier on. That was kind of the way that people did come dressed in their best. There was just such a feeling of really being able to together bring this special witness as white people, that white people did from across the state and across religious communities as well, being Christians and Jews and Unitarians and people together with a common bond of wanting to bring this witness together, this moral witness. We walked 2 by 2 and to the courthouse, and as we came closer, there was a crowd of, I don't know, over 300 people, I guess, men, almost all men. They had some baseball bats, they had some, sticks and other kinds of, and lots of cat calls, lots of things that were said as they were on largely one area. They'd been kind of assigned a place, I guess, where they could stand, and went to the courthouse steps, and Joe read witness, was stopped, and I'm sure he told more of that story. But the thing about that day that I remember most is, as we finished, we sang "America the Beautiful" as a kind of a closing hymn and statement. The crowd of men struck up Dixie. The person who was the deputy for the sheriff, who wasn't there at the time, said to Joe, this crowd's getting a little nasty. He said, I think you better not go back the way you came. Go around to the other side and leave by the other side of the block. And as we went, here stood the black community of Selma, hundreds of people who had come, I think not just out of curiosity to see if we would show up, but in solidarity. And as we came to them, they were singing "We Shall Overcome." And that feeling of solidarity and of being together every time I would sing We Shall Overcome for years, I would start to cry, just remembering what that felt like, and just the kind of togetherness and the kind of solidarity and the kind of support that had been given to us that day was a very meaningful part of my life. Still is. I did participate in some of the mass meetings, not as much because soon the baby came, and I was caring for a newborn, and then a younger child, and our second child was born while we were still in Birmingham as well. So, but I did have that experience and know what that was like. Yes. Of course, Dr. King was unforgettable, and as the leader and as someone who so profoundly did influence, I think, our lives. But each person had a gift. I think of Amelia Boynton and the people in Selma. Women were a part of this movement too, and sometimes I think that they should not be forgotten for the contributions that they made. They were just as brave and just as involved and just as persistent and dedicated.
How much blowback? Can you talk about, were there phone calls, threatening phone calls from the house? Tell me about what you experienced.
After we came back from the Concerned White Citizens March, it was a Saturday. Church was filled with our members, the congregation at St. Paul. Played a trumpet, one of the young men, and he had a welcoming dinner, and we were warmly received. The white people who went back into their white communities were the ones who experienced the harassment and the social distancing and that sort of thing. We were part of the and living in the black community, and people were probably a little hesitant. White people would be a little more hesitant to come into that community. So, if anything, I think we had a different experience than some of the people who had to go back to their white neighbors and experience the kind of harassment that they may have felt, whereas we were so warmly seen and protected during the time of many of the bombings that happened. Elders from the congregation would sleep in the church. They were concerned because we were right next door, and they would walk the block. They were concerned for our protection and our security. We were so bound up in that kind of concern, and really, so there was we didn't experience that because of where we were and who we were connected with, and that was Titusville and the black community and our own congregation members.
Can you talk about what it was like being here during the 16th Street church bombing and that act of violence?
Well, September 15th, that was just before I married Joe. Of course, I know the story of people hearing the explosion and saying, "Oh, we hope that's not what we think it might have been," and then people running to get Chris McNair, and the reality that happened. I wrote to the McNair family. I was in Los Angeles at the time, but I did write to them. Had met them and was very deeply distressed and moved by what happened. But I was not unseen in Birmingham at that time.
Did that, however, incident give you pause to move to Birmingham? Were you concerned?
Well, I think God kind of sets you up. I had the experience of working in the black community in Chicago, and taking walking day and night in that community, which some people would have said would have been a very dangerous kind of community to live in and be part of. I had the experience in Los Angeles also of of that type of experience of living in communities that others might consider dangerous. So I think I felt prepared. I felt marrying Joe that this was where I was supposed to be, the man that I loved, and the opportunity to serve with him in a place where I felt called to be part of that congregation and part of that witness in that time. So, and the thing that I always say to people when they say, well, weren't you afraid? And I said, well, it's all right to be afraid. That's probably a very healthy thing, to be afraid when circumstances call for that. Just don't let your fear keep you from doing the thing that you think is right and that you should be doing.
Tell me a little bit about the experience of living in Titusville during that time.
So we lived in Titusville, just next door to the church. The neighbors who lived next door to us had a son who had some mental health issues, and we got to know them very well, and the kinds of challenges that they were having. We were in each other's homes and visited. That would have been true for the church members who lived in the neighborhood as well. Teens who were church members and lived just across the way from the church would be our babysitters, and so we had those kinds of community experiences.
The people at your church, were they mainly like middle class African Americans, or how would you describe them?
There was a blending of people who had more professional jobs and people who were in service positions and had less skills. People came from the public housing projects, and there were a lot of people who struggled, in terms of just making it through financially and for their families. So it was a blending of, I think, of backgrounds and incomes. I was never arrested as part of the civil rights journey in Birmingham. I did spend time in a women's federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut, for protesting at the School of the Americas at Columbus, Georgia. And that was a school that was training military from Central and South America. Some of the training was very good, but there was an undercurrent of training in terms of how to control populations, intimidation, the kinds of waterboarding and kinds of torture tactics that can be used to try to elicit confessions, and those kinds of issues. I had been in El Salvador, the country of El Salvador, during their civil war when bombs were falling, that U.S. bombs were falling nearby, and documenting in the villages the kinds of atrocities that were happening at the hands of some of the graduates. I knew that the military who were responsible for the death of 6 Jesuits there, and their housekeeper and their daughter, Oscar Romero, the beloved Archbishop, 4 church women that were killed, all had associations with this training and were leaders who had been trained at the School of the Americas. And so had organized over 20 years students, Marquette University students, and we went into the Catholic high schools. They had a large gathering on this weekend of the Thanksgiving vacation in Columbus, and they would come together as Catholic youth. So we bring sometimes a couple of bus loads of young people, and then older people on the plane, and we would bring this witness at the gates of the School of the Americas. I had opportunities to enter and to bring that witness onto the base. I had gotten ban and bar orders that said if you come back you're going to be arrested. Had joined a group of 6 people who had actually walked onto the base unnoticed in this smaller area that was the School of the Americas, and we dug a grave on their on their front lawn before we were discovered. So I had a little history of having been involved. When I did come to bring to the commandant some of the documentation of what the graduates had done when they went back home. School sisters, Catholic sisters, and people in the communities where I had been. And I had been in Haiti, I had been in Colombia, had experienced some of the similar kinds of stories from the people. So I was arrested and brought to trial. The day of the that I was to appear in court before an afternoon appearance, I asked the commandant from the School of the Americas if he would come and meet with me, that I had this folder and I wanted him to see these stories. And as a person of trying to practice nonviolent principles, I said to him, you know, I think we both want the same things for the people of El Salvador. We want them to live in peace, and we want their children to be educated. We want them to have opportunities, not to lose the land that their parents and their forefathers had gifted them with, even though they might not have all of the legal documents to produce that, and to come into a time of peace. But I said, how we get there is where we differ. It's never going to happen with violence, and it's never going to happen with bombs and overcoming a country and trying to reconstitute a kind of democracy that we feel is what it should be. So we did meet. We met for over an hour and had a wonderful, I think, exchange. Very different points of view, but still being able to say, I really believe that you believe in what you're doing, just as I believe in what I'm doing for because of concern for the people. The judge, his name was Judge Faircloth, interestingly enough, and he gave everyone about 15 or 20 minutes to give their testimony as to why they had gone on to the base. And I brought 3 rocks along. I brought a piece of sidewalk, concrete from Milwaukee. We did prayer vigils when there were homicides, and we would invite the community and the families to come. And on the sidewalk, we would leave the stencil of an angel, because we said every life is precious, and there's a loss to the community. Whatever life was taken is a loss that we want to acknowledge here, and we want to support the families, and we want to acknowledge that every life is precious. And then I had a stone from a massacre on a river in El Salvador. Again, they were trying to cross into Guatemala, where they would be safe, and the military just shot them down in the river, and the river ran red with their blood. So this was a rock that said, every life is precious, and to resist those kinds of tactics being used against innocent people. And the third one was from Vietnam. It was a very beautiful rock. It had a goldfish on it, and I had gotten it, and I said, you know, we had 52,000 names and a monument in Washington, D.C. for all of the men who died in the Vietnam War, but there were 2 million Vietnamese who were massacred, many civilians, and things that happened. And so every life is precious, every life. That's why I, crossed the line to say that this is something we have to acknowledge, and this is something that we have to celebrate, and that every life is important. The life of the poor person, the life of the people in the country where we are supporting a war. All of these lives are precious. So I had put these stones in front of the judge, and when it was time to go, I'd finished, I said, Judge, I'd like to have my rocks back. I said, they really have a lot, as you can tell, a lot of meaning for me. And the judge took the one from Vietnam, and he said, I'm going to keep this one. Well, I was sort of taken aback. And at first I was angry, and I thought, no, that's my rock, you can't have it. But then I thought, all right, think of your practice of nonviolence. What are you going to do? And so I said, oh, no, Judge. Take it as my gift. I would not let him take it away from me. I gave it to him. And as I was leaving, one of the local activists said, do you know why the judge kept your rock? And I said, no. They said, early on in the Vietnam War, his younger brother was recruited, and 3 months into the war, he died. The judge sent me a note and a little Gideon Bible later. I can't really say anything of value, but he wanted to acknowledge that that we had communicated about something that was precious to him and precious to me. So I think sometimes, again, nonviolent civil disobedience, the heartbeat of bringing about the civil rights movement with nonviolent resistance to all of those systems that were oppressing, and the whole history of that was a strength that has lessons for us in many aspects of our life, and they carry over.